I never imagined that a simple Tuesday morning would completely destroy everything I thought I knew about dignity, justice, and my place in this world. My name is David Morrison, and I'm about to tell you about the day I was publicly humiliated in front of hundreds of people, stripped of my dignity, and then watched as the entire situation flipped in a way that no one could have predicted. This is my story, and I need to tell it from the beginning because every detail matters. Every moment led to the next, and the ending is something I still can't fully believe even though I lived through it. It started on a Tuesday morning in late October. I was sitting at my kitchen table in my small apartment in Brooklyn, drinking coffee and reviewing my notes for what I thought would be just another business trip. I'm a software engineer, 34 years old, and I'd been working for the past 8 months on a project that would either make or break my career. The project involved developing a revolutionary AI system for a major airline company, and after months of pitching, revising, and holding my breath, they'd finally agreed to a meeting at their corporate headquarters in Miami. This wasn't just any meeting. This was the meeting where I'd present my final proposal, the one that could lead to a multi-million-dollar contract for my small startup company. I'd spent every penny I had saved over the past 5 years building this company with my best friend and business partner, Jason. We'd worked out of coffee shops in my tiny apartment, survived on ramen noodles and hope, and poured our hearts into creating something we believed could change the industry. This meeting in Miami represented everything we'd been working toward. If we landed this contract, we'd be set. We could hire a proper team, get a real office, pay ourselves actual salaries instead of scraping by. If we didn't land it, we'd probably have to shut down and go back to working for other people's dreams instead of our own. The flight was scheduled to leave JFK at 11 in the morning. I'd booked the ticket weeks ago, and because this meeting was so important, because I wanted to arrive fresh and focused instead of cramped and exhausted, I'd done something I'd never done before in my entire life. I'd upgraded to first class. It cost an extra $800 that I honestly couldn't afford, but I justified it by telling myself this was an investment in my success. I needed to walk into that meeting feeling confident and powerful, not beaten down by an uncomfortable flight in a middle seat in the back of the plane. I dressed carefully that morning, putting on my best suit, the charcoal gray one I'd bought specifically for important meetings. I polished my shoes until they gleamed. I trimmed my beard and made sure every hair was in place. I looked at myself in the mirror and practiced my confident smile, the one that said I belonged in rooms with executives and decision makers. I was a black man who'd grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Baltimore, raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and housed. I'd worked my way through college on scholarships and loans, taught myself coding in the library because we couldn't afford a computer at home, and built everything I had from absolutely nothing. I was proud of how far I'd come, and I was determined to go further. The cab ride to JFK took 40 minutes through morning traffic. I watched the city roll past my window and thought about my mother who'd passed away 3 years ago from cancer. She never got to see me start my own company, never got to know that her sacrifices had led to something real and meaningful. I wished she could be there to see me land this contract, to know that all her hard work raising me had paid off. I made a silent promise to her that I'd make this meeting count, that I'd honor her memory by succeeding. At the airport, I checked in at the first-class counter for the first time in my life. The agent was friendly and efficient, printing my boarding pass and directing me to the first-class security line. Even going through security felt different in the first-class lane. It was faster, less crowded, more dignified somehow. I was starting to understand why wealthy people flew this way. It wasn't just about the bigger seat on the plane. It was about being treated like you mattered, like your time was valuable, like you were someone worth respecting. After security, I found my way to the airline's exclusive lounge for first-class passengers. I'd never been in one of these before, and I felt a small thrill of excitement as I walked through the frosted glass doors. The lounge was beautiful, all modern furniture and soft lighting, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the runways. There was a complimentary bar, a buffet with fresh food, comfortable seating areas, and an atmosphere of quiet luxury that felt a million miles away from the chaos of the main terminal. I checked in with the woman at the reception desk, showing her my boarding pass. She smiled and welcomed me, telling me to make myself comfortable and that my flight would begin boarding in about an hour. I found a seat near the windows, set down my laptop bag, and allowed myself a moment to just breathe and take it all in. I'd made it. I was here. I was living proof that hard work and determination could take you places you'd only dreamed about. I got myself a coffee from the bar and settled into my seat, pulling out my laptop to review my presentation one more time. The lounge was moderately busy with other travelers, most of them dressed in business attire, tapping on laptops or talking quietly on phones. I felt like I fit right in, just another successful professional on their way to an important meeting. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere. That feeling lasted exactly 23 minutes. I was deep into reviewing my slides when I became aware of someone standing over me. I looked up to find a tall white man in an expensive-looking navy suit staring down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. He appeared to be in his late 50s, with silver hair perfectly styled and a Rolex that probably cost more than my entire year's rent. Everything about him screamed wealth and authority. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cool and measured. "I think there's been some kind of mistake." I blinked, confused. "I'm sorry." "This lounge is for first-class passengers only," he said, speaking slowly as if I might not understand English very well. "The main terminal is back that way." He gestured vaguely toward the entrance. It took me a moment to understand what was happening. When I did, I felt heat rise up the back of my neck. "I am a first-class passenger," I said, keeping my voice calm even though something hot and uncomfortable was building in my chest. "I checked in at the desk when I arrived." The man's expression didn't change. "I fly first class on this airline every week," he said, as if this somehow proved I was lying. "I've never seen you here before." The logic was so absurd it almost made me laugh. I'd never seen him before either, but I wasn't questioning his right to be here. "This is my first time flying first class," I explained, still trying to keep things civil. "I have a meeting in Miami and I upgraded my ticket." He looked me up and down slowly, his eyes lingering on my face, my suit, my laptop bag. I could see him trying to reconcile what he was seeing with whatever assumptions he'd made about who belonged in this space. "I'm going to need to verify that with the staff," he said. "We've had issues with people trying to access lounges they're not authorized for." The words hit me like a slap. Issues, people. He meant people who looked like me. Young black men who clearly couldn't afford to be here, who must be lying or stealing or somehow gaming the system. The assumption was so blatant, so insulting, that for a moment I couldn't speak. "Feel free to verify whatever you want," I finally said, my voice tight. "My boarding pass is right here if you'd like to see it." I pulled out my phone and opened my mobile boarding pass, showing him clearly that I was booked in Seat 2A, first-class service to Miami. He barely glanced at it. "Anyone can fake a digital boarding pass," he said dismissively. "I'm getting security." Before I could respond, he walked away toward the reception desk. I sat there frozen, my heart pounding, watching as he spoke to the woman who'd checked me in earlier. She looked confused, then concerned, glancing over at me. I saw her shake her head, point at her computer screen, but the man kept talking, his gestures becoming more animated. Other passengers were starting to notice now, conversations dying down as people turned to watch whatever drama was unfolding. The receptionist picked up her phone. My stomach dropped. Within minutes, two airport security guards appeared at the lounge entrance. They were both large men, one white and one Latino, with serious expressions and hands resting near their belts in that way security personnel do when they're preparing for potential trouble. The silver-haired man met them at the entrance and pointed directly at me. I've been black in America for 34 years. I know how these situations can go. I know that sudden movements can be misinterpreted, that anger can be seen as aggression, that my size and gender and skin color all combine to make me appear threatening even when I'm doing absolutely nothing wrong. So I stayed very still in my seat, my hands visible on the table in front of me, my expression carefully neutral as the security guards approached. Every eye in the lounge was on me now. Conversations had stopped completely. Some people were openly staring. A few had their phones out, and I realized with a sick feeling that I was probably being recorded. This moment of humiliation was going to be captured and potentially shared with thousands of strangers on the internet. "Sir," the white security guard said as they reached my seat, his voice professionally neutral. "We need to see your identification and boarding pass." "Of course," I said quietly. I moved slowly and deliberately, reaching for my wallet and pulling out my driver's license, then pulling up my boarding pass on my phone again. My hands were shaking slightly and I hated myself for it. I'd done nothing wrong, nothing, but I was shaking anyway because I knew how powerless I was in this moment. The security guard examined my ID carefully, comparing my face to the photo. He looked at my boarding pass, then pulled out his own phone and appeared to be checking something in the airline system. The silver-haired man stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching with an expression of grim satisfaction like he'd caught a criminal in the act. The silence stretched out. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Could hear someone cough nervously across the lounge. Could hear the distant sound of announcements from the main terminal. Time seemed to slow down, each second dragging into eternity while I sat there being investigated for the crime of existing in a space someone had decided I didn't belong in. Finally, the security guard handed back my ID and lowered his phone. "Mr. Morrison," he said, and I heard something in his voice that might have been sympathy. "Your credentials check out. You're a legitimate first-class passenger. I apologize for the inconvenience." Relief flooded through me so powerfully I felt dizzy, but it was quickly followed by anger, deep and hot and righteous, an inconvenience. He called it an inconvenience, like this was some minor mix-up, like I hadn't just been publicly accused of fraud and investigated like a criminal while dozens of people watched and recorded. "Thank you," I managed to say, my voice barely steady. The security guard turned to the silver-haired man. "Sir, Mr. Morrison is authorized to be here. His ticket and identification are valid. There's no issue." I expected an apology, even a grudging one, even just an acknowledgement that he'd made a mistake, that he'd humiliated me based on nothing but his own prejudice. Instead, the man's face reddened. "That can't be right," he said to the security guard. "Check again. Maybe the ticket is stolen or fraudulent." The security guard's expression hardened slightly. "Sir, I've verified his credentials through the airline system. Everything is legitimate. I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat." "Do you know who I am?" the man said, his voice rising. "I'm Harrison Blake, CEO of Blake Industries. I fly this route twice a month, and I'm telling you something isn't right here." Blake Industries. I recognized the name. They were a major manufacturing conglomerate, one of the largest in the country. This man wasn't just wealthy. He was powerful, connected, the kind of person who was used to being listened to and obeyed. The security guard remained professional. "Mr. Blake, I understand your concern, but I've done my job and verified that Mr. Morrison is exactly where he's supposed to be. If you have any further concerns, you're welcome to speak with the airline's customer service, but I need you to stop disrupting the lounge." For a long moment, Blake stared at the security guard, clearly weighing whether to push further. Then he looked at me, and the expression on his face made my stomach turn. It wasn't embarrassment or shame for what he'd done. It was resentment, anger that I'd been proven right, that he'd been proven wrong, that he'd lost this confrontation in front of witnesses. Fine, he said curtly. He walked back to his seat on the opposite side of the lounge, pulled out his phone, and began typing furiously, his jaw clenched. The security guards gave me apologetic nods and left. The receptionist caught my eye from her desk and mouthed what looked like "I'm sorry." Slowly, the other passengers returned to their activities, though I could still feel eyes on me, could still hear whispered conversations. I sat there trembling with adrenaline and humiliation and anger. My carefully cultivated sense of belonging had been shattered. I no longer felt like a successful professional in this beautiful lounge. I felt like an intruder who'd been temporarily allowed to stay but could be challenged and removed at any moment. I felt like everyone was looking at me differently now, wondering if maybe Blake had been right to question me, wondering what I'd done to deserve suspicion. I tried to go back to reviewing my presentation, but I couldn't focus. The words on my laptop screen blurred together. My hands were still shaking. I kept replaying the confrontation in my mind, thinking of all the things I should have said, all the ways I could have defended myself more forcefully, but I knew the truth. There was nothing I could have said or done differently, no magic words that would have prevented this. Because the problem wasn't anything I'd done, the problem was what I was, a young black man in a space that someone had decided wasn't meant for people like me. 20 minutes passed. The boarding call for my flight came over the lounge speakers. I gathered my things slowly, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. Other first-class passengers began moving toward the exit, including Harrison Blake. I hung back, not wanting to walk anywhere near him, not wanting another confrontation. But as we filed out of the lounge and headed toward the gate, I realized with growing dread that Blake was on my flight. Of course he was. He'd said he flew this route twice a month. We were going to the same place. The gate agent welcomed first-class passengers warmly as we boarded ahead of everyone else. I walked down the jetway feeling none of the excitement I'd felt earlier, just a desperate wish to get to my seat, put on headphones, and disappear into myself for the next 3 hours. I reached my seat 2A, the window seat in the second row of first class. I stowed my laptop bag in the overhead bin and settled in, trying to make myself as small and invisible as possible. The seats were large and comfortable, covered in soft leather with plenty of legroom and a small screen for entertainment. Under different circumstances, I would have been thrilled. Now I just felt numb. Other passengers filed past. A businessman who nodded politely, a woman with designer luggage who ignored me completely, an elderly couple who smiled warmly. And then Harrison Blake appeared in the aisle, checking his boarding pass, and looked directly at the seat next to mine. No, please no, but yes, his seat was to be right next to me. For the next 3 hours, I was going to be trapped in a metal tube 30,000 feet in the air, sitting inches away from a man who had publicly humiliated me less than an hour ago. Blake saw me and his expression darkened. For a moment, I thought he might demand a seat change, and part of me desperately hoped he would. But instead, he pressed his lips into a thin line, stowed his bag, and sat down without a word. He angled his body away from me as much as the seat would allow, claiming the armrest between us with aggressive possession. The rest of the passengers boarded. A flight attendant came through offering pre-departure beverages. "What can I get you gentlemen?" she asked cheerfully. "Whiskey neat," Blake said curtly. "Just water, please," I said quietly. She brought our drinks and moved on. Blake downed his whiskey in 2 gulps and immediately requested another. I sipped my water and stared out the window at the baggage handlers loading luggage below, wishing I was anywhere else in the world. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming us aboard and giving us our flight time to Miami, 2 hours and 51 minutes. I closed my eyes. The plane pushed back from the gate, and we began the slow taxi toward the runway. Blake pulled out his laptop and began working, his fingers attacking the keyboard with unnecessary force. I could feel the tension radiating off him in waves. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us acknowledged the other's existence. We took off smoothly, climbing through scattered clouds into brilliant sunshine. Under different circumstances, I would have enjoyed the view. Instead, I just felt trapped and miserable, counting down the minutes until this flight would be over and I could escape. The flight attendant came by again after we reached cruising altitude. "Can I offer you gentlemen anything to drink? We also have a selection of snacks available." "Another whiskey," Blake said, "and make it a double this time." "I'm fine, thank you," I said. She brought his drink and he consumed it quickly, his face flushing slightly. I wondered if he was trying to drink away his embarrassment or his anger or whatever complex emotions were churning inside him. I didn't particularly care. I just wanted to get through this flight without another confrontation. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans. About an hour into the flight, the plane suddenly dropped. Not a little bump of turbulence, but a real drop, the kind that makes your stomach lurch and brings gasps from passengers throughout the cabin. The seatbelt sign dinged on urgently. Then it happened again and again. The plane began bucking and shaking violently, dropping and rising in stomach-churning waves. An overhead bin popped open and bags tumbled out. Someone screamed. The flight attendants, who'd been in the middle of meal service, abandoned their carts and rushed to their jump seats, strapping in quickly. The captain's voice came over the intercom, strained but controlled. "Folks, we've encountered some severe unexpected turbulence. Flight attendants, please be seated immediately. Everyone else, make sure your seatbelts are fastened tight. We're going to get through this." The plane dropped again, harder this time, and I heard the groan of metal, felt the whole aircraft shudder. This wasn't normal turbulence. This was genuinely frightening, the kind of turbulence that makes you remember you're in a fragile tube of metal impossibly high above the earth, held up by nothing but physics and faith. My hands gripped the armrest so hard my knuckles went white. My heart hammered against my ribs. Around me, passengers were crying, praying, holding hands with strangers. The plane pitched and yawed, tossing us like a toy. And then, in the midst of the chaos, I felt something grab my hand. I looked down to see Harrison Blake's hand covering mine on the armrest, gripping it with desperate strength. His face was ashen, his eyes wide with terror, his expensive facade completely shattered by primal fear. For a second, pure instinct told me to pull away. This was the man who'd humiliated me, who'd accused me of fraud, who'd gotten security called on me. But then I looked at his face and saw the raw human fear there, saw him as just another scared person facing their possible death, and something in me softened despite everything. I turned my hand over and squeezed back. "It's going to be okay," I heard myself saying, my voice somehow steady even though I was terrified too. "The pilots know what they're doing, we're going to be fine." I had no way of knowing if that was true. The plane was still shaking violently, still dropping and rising in terrifying waves, but Blake needed to hear it, needed something to hold on to besides physical contact with a stranger. "I'm scared," he said, his voice small and broken, nothing like the authoritative tone he'd used in the lounge. "I'm really scared." "Me too," I admitted. "But we're going to get through it together. Just breathe in and out. Focus on breathing." We sat there holding hands like children, two men who'd been enemies an hour ago, united by the great equalizer of mortality. The turbulence continued for what felt like forever, but was probably only 5 or 6 minutes. Long, terrifying minutes where every bump felt like it might be the one that broke something critical, that sent us spiraling out of control. But gradually, slowly, the shaking began to ease. The violent drops became gentler bumps. The plane steadied. The tension in the cabin began to release like a held breath finally exhaled. The captain came back on. "Folks, we're through the worst of it. We hit some severe wind shear from a storm system that wasn't supposed to be in our flight path. We're climbing to a higher altitude where the air should be smoother. I apologize for that rough patch. Flight attendants, you can resume service when you feel it's safe." Relief swept through the cabin in an almost physical wave. People laughed and cried at the same time. Strangers hugged, someone started clapping, and others joined in, applauding the pilots who'd gotten us through safely. Blake slowly released my hand. His face was still pale, but some color was returning. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen before: recognition. Not recognition of who I was, but recognition that I was a full human being, not just an assumption or a category or a problem to be solved. "Thank you," he said quietly, for helping me through that, for not pulling away when I grabbed your hand. "Of course," I said, "we're all just people when it comes down to it. Fear doesn't care about first class or economy, black or white. Fear just is." He nodded slowly, seeming to process this. We sat in silence for a moment as the plane continued to smooth out and the flight attendants cautiously emerged from their jump seats to check on passengers. "I owe you an apology," Blake said finally, the words clearly difficult for him. "What I did in the lounge, that was wrong, completely wrong. I made assumptions about you based on things that shouldn't have mattered. You had every right to be there. I had no right to question you." It was the apology I'd been wanting in the lounge, but hearing it now after everything that had just happened, it felt more significant somehow, more real. "Why did you do it?" I asked. Not accusingly, but genuinely curious. "What made you look at me and decide I didn't belong there?" Blake was quiet for a long time. "Honestly, I don't know, or maybe I do know and I don't want to admit it. I saw you and I assumed. I assumed that someone who looked like you couldn't afford first class, couldn't have legitimate business in that lounge. And that assumption came from somewhere ugly inside me, somewhere I didn't even know existed until this moment." "Racism," I said softly, "that's what it's called. It doesn't have to be conscious or intentional to be real and harmful." "Yes," he said, "racism. I've spent my whole life thinking I wasn't racist because I didn't use slurs or burn crosses, but what I did today was racist. There's no other word for it, and I'm ashamed." The flight attendant came by, looking shaken but professional. "Is everyone okay here? Can I get you anything?" "I'd like some water," Blake said. "And can you please bring this gentleman whatever he'd like? Put it on my tab. It's the least I can do." "Just water is fine for me too," I said. "Thank you." She brought us both water and moved on to check other passengers. Blake and I sipped in silence for a moment. "Can I ask what you do?" Blake said. "Professionally, I mean, if that's not too forward." I hesitated, then decided there was no harm in answering. "I'm a software engineer. I run a startup with my business partner. We're developing AI systems for enterprise clients. I'm on my way to Miami to pitch a major airline on a contract." Blake's eyebrows rose. "That's impressive. How long have you been working on it?" "8 months of active development, but years of education and experience before that." "In the first class ticket?" he asked carefully. "I saved up for it," I said. "This meeting is important enough that I wanted to arrive fresh and focused. It cost more than I could really afford, but I figured it was an investment in my success." Blake looked down at his hands. "And I tried to have you thrown out. God, I'm so sorry." We talked for the rest of the flight, really talked, not just polite small talk. Blake told me about his company, about his work, about his family. I told him about my startup, about the challenges of building a business from nothing, about growing up with a single mother who worked herself to exhaustion to give me opportunities. Something shifted between us during that conversation. Not friendship exactly, but understanding. A bridge built across a chasm that had seemed uncrossable just hours before. As we began our descent into Miami, Blake pulled out his wallet and handed me a business card. "I know this might seem inappropriate after everything that happened today," he said, "but I meant what I said about being impressed by what you're doing. Blake Industries has been looking for better AI solutions for our supply chain management. If you're interested, I'd like to set up a meeting to discuss whether your technology might be a fit for our needs." I stared at the card. This was surreal. The man who'd tried to have me removed from a lounge now wanted to potentially become a client. "I appreciate that," I said carefully, "but I need to be honest. What happened today really hurt. It was humiliating and degrading, and it brought up every difficult experience I've ever had as a black man trying to succeed in professional spaces. An apology is appreciated, but it doesn't erase that pain." "I understand," Blake said, "and I don't expect it to, but I'm hoping that you'll give me a chance to prove that people can learn and change." Not because you owe me that chance, but because maybe something good can come from something that started out so badly. I pocketed his card without committing to anything. The plane touched down smoothly in Miami, and as we taxied to the gate, I felt exhausted in a way that went far beyond physical tiredness. We deplaned together, walking through the Miami terminal side by side. At the point where our paths would diverge, Blake stopped and extended his hand. "Good luck with your pitch," he said. "I genuinely hope you land the contract. You've clearly worked hard for it and you deserve success." I shook his hand. "Thank you and safe travels to wherever you're going next." He nodded and walked away toward ground transportation. I headed for the rental car area, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. I needed to shift gears to focus on my presentation, to put the morning's drama behind me and concentrate on why I was here. I got my rental car and drove to my hotel, a modest but clean place near the airport. I had 4 hours before my meeting. I ordered room service, reviewed my presentation one final time, and tried to calm my nerves. The meeting itself was in a gleaming office tower in downtown Miami. I arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in my suit that now felt tainted by the morning's events. The receptionist directed me to a conference room on the 20th floor, where I was greeted by three executives from the airline, a senior vice president, a chief technology officer, and a head of operations. I set up my laptop and launched into my presentation. Despite everything that had happened, despite my emotional exhaustion, I delivered it well. I'd practiced so many times that the words came automatically, and my passion for the technology shone through. I showed them how our AI system could optimize their flight scheduling, reduce delays, improve fuel efficiency, and enhance customer satisfaction. I walked them through case studies and demonstrations. I answered their technical questions with confidence. They were impressed. I could see it in their faces, hear it in their questions. This was going well, really well. At the end of the presentation, the senior vice president smiled and said the words I'd been hoping to hear. "Mr. Morrison, this is exactly what we've been looking for. We'd like to move forward with a pilot program. Our legal team will draw up a contract, and if the pilot goes well, we'll expand it to a full implementation." I felt like I might float off the ground. "That's wonderful. Thank you so much for this opportunity." We shook hands all around, discussed next steps and timelines, and I left the building walking on air. I'd done it. Despite everything, despite the humiliation and the fear and the exhaustion, I'd done it. I'd landed the contract that would change everything for my company. I called Jason immediately. "We got it," I said as soon as he answered. "They're moving forward with a pilot program." His whoop of joy was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Are you serious, Marcus? That's incredible. I can't believe it. We did it." "We did it," I agreed, grinning so hard my face hurt. We talked for 20 minutes about next steps, about what this meant for the company, about how we'd celebrate when I got back to New York. After we hung up, I just stood there on the Miami street, letting the reality sink in. Everything I'd worked for, everything my mother had sacrificed for, it was all leading to this moment. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Morrison, this is Harrison Blake. I hope your meeting went well. I've been thinking a lot about our conversation on the plane, and I'd like to discuss something with you when you're back in New York. No pressure, but I think there might be an opportunity for both of us to benefit from a continued dialogue. I hope you'll consider it." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it and forget Blake existed, but another part of me was curious. What kind of opportunity was he talking about? And more importantly, could I trust him after what he'd done? I decided to sleep on it. I had a late afternoon flight back to New York the next day, which gave me time to process everything and decide how to respond. That night, lying in my hotel bed, I replayed the entire day in my mind. The humiliation in the lounge, the fear during the turbulence, Blake's apology, the successful pitch, the job offer from the man who'd racially profiled me. It was almost too much to process, too many emotional extremes packed into one day. But as I drifted off to sleep, I found myself thinking about what Blake had said, that people can learn and change, that something good can come from something that started badly. Was that naive, or was it possible? I flew home to New York the next afternoon, this time without incident. No one questioned my right to be in first class. No one called security. I had a quiet, uneventful flight which felt like a gift after the drama of the previous day. Back in Brooklyn, I met with Jason to strategize our next steps with the airline contract. We celebrated with cheap champagne and expensive sushi, a reversal of what made sense but somehow perfect for the moment. We were on our way, finally, truly on our way. The next morning, I decided to respond to Blake's text. Meeting went well. I'm open to a conversation. What did you have in mind? He responded within minutes. Would you be willing to meet for coffee? I'd like to discuss a potential consulting opportunity, but more importantly, I'd like to continue the conversation we started on the plane. I've been doing a lot of thinking since Tuesday. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop in Midtown Manhattan the following afternoon. I arrived early and claimed a table in the back where we'd have some privacy. Blake arrived right on time, dressed casually in slacks and a sweater rather than the business suit I'd seen him in before. Thank you for agreeing to meet, he said as he sat down. Can I get you something? Coffee, tea? Just black coffee, thanks. He ordered for both of us and returned to the table. For a moment, we sat in awkward silence. I've spent the last few days doing some serious self-examination, Blake said finally. What happened on Tuesday, that confrontation in the lounge, it forced me to confront some things about myself that I've been avoiding my whole life. I grew up with privilege, white privilege, economic privilege, every kind of privilege. And I've moved through the world assuming that everyone I encountered was starting from the same place I was. When I saw you in that lounge, I didn't see a fellow professional. I saw someone who didn't fit my mental image of what a first-class passenger looks like. And that image was based entirely on racial stereotypes I didn't even know I had. I listened without interrupting, letting him work through his thoughts. Since Tuesday, I've been educating myself, he continued. Reading books and articles about implicit bias, about systemic racism, about how people like me perpetuate inequality without even realizing it. And I've been looking at my own company with new eyes, seeing patterns I was blind to before. Our executive team is all white. Our board is all white. Our hiring practices, our promotion decisions, our supplier relationships, all of it reflects the same biases that led me to question your presence in that lounge. That's good that you're recognizing it, I said carefully. Recognition is the first step, but the question is what you're going to do about it. That's why I wanted to meet with you, Blake said. I want to do better. I want my company to do better. And I think you might be able to help with that if you're willing. He laid out his proposal. Blake Industries wanted to hire me as a diversity consultant, working with their HR department to review hiring practices, develop training programs, and help create a more inclusive workplace culture. It would be a 6-month contract, well paid, and would involve working closely with Blake and his executive team. I know it's a lot to ask, Blake said, especially given how we met. You'd be well within your rights to tell me to figure it out on my own, but I'm asking anyway because I think you have insights and perspectives that we desperately need. I thought about it carefully. Can I be completely honest with you, please? What you're offering is essentially asking me to do emotional labor to fix problems I didn't create, to spend my time and energy educating you and your company about things you should have already understood. That's a lot to ask, especially from someone you hurt, Blake nodded. You're absolutely right, and I wouldn't blame you for saying no, but I'm hoping you'll consider it anyway, not as a favor to me, but as an opportunity to make real change in an organization that employs over 3,000 people. The work you do would benefit all of those employees, particularly the ones from marginalized communities who have been navigating our biased systems for years. He had a point. This wasn't just about Blake's personal growth, it was about potentially improving conditions for thousands of workers. I need time to think about it, I said. This is a big decision and I need to discuss it with my business partner. Our startup is taking off now and I need to make sure I'm not overcommitting. Of course, Blake said, take all the time you need, but Marcus, I want you to know something. Whether or not you decide to work with Blake Industries, meeting you changed my life. You showed me grace when I deserved condemnation. You helped me during that turbulence even after I'd humiliated you. That's the kind of character and strength that I want to emulate, so thank you for everything. We finished our coffee and parted ways. I walked back to my apartment through the crowded Manhattan streets, thinking hard about what to do. Over the next week, I discussed it extensively with Jason. We weighed the pros and cons, considered our capacity and our values. The airline contract was going to keep us very busy, but the Blake Industries opportunity was too significant to dismiss out of hand. Finally, we came to a decision. I would take the consulting contract, but on my terms. I'd work with Blake Industries for 6 months, but I'd have full authority to make recommendations and implement changes. They'd have to commit to actually following through on those recommendations, not just paying me to make themselves feel better. And I'd bring in Jason to help, both to share the workload and to provide additional perspectives. Blake agreed to all of my conditions without hesitation. I started the consulting work 2 weeks later. It was challenging, frustrating, and often exhausting. I encountered resistance from executives who didn't want to admit their company had problems. I uncovered patterns of discrimination that were deeply embedded in company culture. I had uncomfortable conversations and pushed people out of their comfort zones, but I also saw real change. Blake Industries implemented new hiring practices that dramatically increased diversity in their applicant pool. They launched mentorship programs for employees from underrepresented backgrounds. They audited their pay scales and corrected inequities. They brought in speakers and trainers to educate their workforce about bias and inclusion. Blake himself was transformed. He didn't just support these initiatives, he led them. He attended every training session, read every book I recommended, had difficult conversations with longtime colleagues about changing the company culture. He made mistakes sometimes, said the wrong thing, or missed the nuance of a situation, but he was genuinely trying to learn and grow. 3 months into the consulting contract, Blake called me into his office for a private meeting. I expected it to be about some aspect of the diversity work, but instead he had something else on his mind. I need to tell you something, he said, looking nervous in a way I rarely saw. Something I should have told you weeks ago. My stomach clenched. What is it? Do you remember how I said I fly to Miami twice a month? Yes, the reason I fly there is to visit my daughter. She lives there with my ex-wife. We divorced 5 years ago. I wasn't sure where this was going. Okay. My daughter's name is Kennedy. She's 17 years old and she's black. I stared at him, completely blindsided. What? My ex-wife is black, Blake continued. We met in college, got married young, had Kennedy, and then grew apart over the years. The divorce was amicable, and I see Kennedy regularly. She's the most important person in my life. If your daughter is black, I said slowly, how could you have treated me the way you did in that lounge? How could you have those biases when you're raising a black child? Blake's face crumpled. That's the question I've been asking myself every day since it happened. How could I love my daughter more than anything in the world and still carry these racist assumptions? How could I not see the contradiction? But that's the insidious thing about bias, isn't it? We compartmentalize. We make exceptions for the people we love while still holding prejudiced views about everyone else who looks like them. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photo. A beautiful teenage girl with dark skin and bright eyes wearing a basketball uniform, grinning at the camera. This is Kennedy, he said. And when I think about how I treated you, I imagine it happening to her. I imagine some ignorant man questioning whether she belongs in a space she's paid to access, calling security on her, humiliating her in public. The thought makes me sick, literally physically sick. I didn't know what to say. This revelation changed everything and nothing at the same time. It explained some of Blake's intensity around the diversity work, his willingness to be challenged and changed, but it also made his initial actions even more incomprehensible. "Does Kennedy know what happened?" I asked. "Yes," Blake said quietly. "I told her everything. I felt like I owed her the truth about who her father is, including the ugly parts. She was furious with me. We had a long, painful conversation about it. She said she's experienced racism her whole life, people making assumptions about her intelligence or her worth based on her skin color, and knowing that her own father carried those same biases broke her heart." How did that conversation end? With her telling me that she loved me but was disappointed in me and that she expected me to do better, not just apologize but actually change. That's when I knew I had to reach out to you, had to try to make something positive out of the terrible thing I'd done. We sat in silence for a moment. "I'd like you to meet her," Blake said. "Kennedy, I mean, she's coming to New York next month for Thanksgiving. I think it would mean a lot to her to meet the person who's been helping me become better." "I'd like that," I said honestly. The Thanksgiving meeting happened at Blake's apartment in Manhattan, a massive penthouse overlooking Central Park. Kennedy was sharp and funny and didn't pull any punches, asking me pointed questions about whether I thought her father was genuinely changing or just performing change. I gave her honest answers, acknowledging both the progress I'd seen and the work that remained. By the end of the evening, I felt like I'd made a new friend. Kennedy and I exchanged numbers and started texting occasionally, comparing notes on her father's progress and joking about his occasional missteps. The 6-month consulting contract came to an end in April. Blake Industries had made significant, measurable progress in their diversity and inclusion efforts. The numbers showed it: more diverse hiring, more equitable promotions, higher retention rates for employees from underrepresented groups. The culture showed it too. Employees reported feeling more valued and respected, and the company had earned recognition from diversity organizations for their efforts. On my last day, Blake called together the entire executive team for a final meeting. He stood up to address the group. "6 months ago, I made a terrible mistake," he said. "I racially profiled a man in an airport lounge and had security called on him because I assumed he didn't belong there. That man was Marcus Morrison, who's been working with us for the past 6 months. What I did was racist, inexcusable, and a reflection of biases I didn't even know I carried." The executives shifted uncomfortably. This was clearly not the usual corporate meeting. "Marcus could have and probably should have told me to go to hell," Blake continued. "Instead, he gave me an opportunity to learn and change, and through his work here, he's given all of us that same opportunity. The changes we've made to our company aren't just the right thing to do morally. They're making us a better, stronger organization. Our employee satisfaction is up. Our innovation metrics are up. We're attracting better talent and retaining them longer." He turned to me. "Marcus, I know I can never fully repay what you've given us, but I want to try. Blake Industries would like to contract with your startup for our AI needs going forward. We've reviewed your technology and we believe it's exactly what we need to optimize our supply chain. Consider it our first major corporate client." I was speechless. This contract would be huge, potentially bigger than the airline deal. "Additionally," Blake continued, "I've established a scholarship fund in your mother's name at your alma mater. The Morrison Scholarship will provide full tuition for students from underrepresented backgrounds studying computer science. I know your mother worked incredibly hard to give you opportunities, and this seems like a fitting way to honor her memory by creating opportunities for others." My eyes filled with tears. I couldn't speak. Blake walked over and extended his hand. "Thank you, Marcus, for your grace, your wisdom, your patience, and your willingness to believe that people can change." I shook his hand, then pulled him into a hug. The room erupted in applause. That night, I called Jason and told him about the contract. He screamed so loud I thought he might damage his vocal cords. Our little startup that we'd built from nothing, that had survived on ramen and hope, was now positioned to become a major player in the industry. 2 years have passed since that Tuesday in the airport lounge. In that time, my company has grown to 25 employees. We've landed contracts with major corporations across multiple industries. We've been featured in tech publications and won awards for innovation. Jason and I have proper salaries, health insurance, and a beautiful office in Manhattan. Blake Industries has continued their diversity work, expanding beyond what I helped them start. Kennedy visits often and has become like a younger sister to me. She's headed to college this fall, planning to study social justice and public policy. Harrison Blake and I have become unlikely friends. We have lunch once a month, and he still asks me challenging questions about how he can do better, how his company can be more equitable. He makes mistakes sometimes, says something ignorant, or misses an important nuance, but he's genuinely trying, and that counts for something. Last month, I was invited to speak at a conference about diversity in tech. During my talk, I told the story of what happened in that airport lounge. I described the humiliation, the anger, the fear during the turbulence, Blake's apology, and everything that came after. I'm not telling you this story because I think it always works out this way, I said to the audience. Most of the time, when someone experiences racism, there's no apology, no redemption arc, no scholarship fund or consulting contract. Most of the time, you just carry the hurt and keep moving forward. I paused, looking out at the faces in the crowd, seeing people who understood exactly what I meant. But I'm also telling you that change is possible, I continued. Not because we're responsible for changing the people who hurt us, but because sometimes, when we have the emotional capacity and the situation allows for it, extending grace can create unexpected opportunities. Not for them, but for us. The consulting work I did at Blake Industries opened doors I never would have had otherwise. The friendship I've built with Blake and his daughter has enriched my life in ways I couldn't have predicted. The key is that the grace I extended was on my terms, I said. I set boundaries, I made demands, I required real change, not just apologies. And I was always prepared to walk away if those conditions weren't met. Grace without accountability is just enabling. But grace with accountability can be transformative. After the talk, a young black woman approached me. "Thank you for that story," she said. "I was profiled last week at a client site. The security guard didn't believe I was there for a meeting and made me wait in the lobby until my contact came down to verify. I've been so angry about it, and I wasn't sure what to do with that anger." "Your anger is valid," I told her. "It's justified and you have every right to it. What you do with it is up to you. Maybe you report the security guard, maybe you demand an apology from the company, maybe you walk away from that client entirely. There's no wrong answer as long as you're prioritizing your own well-being." She nodded thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something? Do you ever regret giving Blake a second chance?" I thought about it carefully. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Sometimes I wonder if I should have just walked away, if I let him off too easy, if I was doing free emotional labor that I shouldn't have had to do. But then I think about the scholarship fund in my mother's name, about the hundreds of students who will benefit from it. I think about the employees at Blake Industries who have better working conditions because of the changes we implemented. I think about Kennedy and the relationship we've built. And I think maybe it was worth it. Not because Blake deserved my forgiveness," I continued, "but because I deserved the opportunities that came from it. I deserve to build my company into something successful. I deserve to honor my mother's memory in a meaningful way. I deserve to find unexpected friendship and connection. Those things weren't gifts from Blake. They were things I created by choosing grace over bitterness while still demanding accountability and change." The young woman thanked me and walked away. I stood there thinking about how far I'd come from that morning in the airport lounge when I'd felt small and powerless and humiliated. The truth is that experience did change me. It forced me to confront questions about grace and justice, about when to fight and when to extend olive branches, about how to succeed in a world that often doesn't want you to. It showed me that I was stronger than I'd known, capable of navigating impossible situations with dignity and wisdom. But it also gave me something I hadn't expected, a deeper understanding of human complexity. Blake wasn't a cartoon villain. He was a flawed person carrying biases he didn't even know he had, raising a black daughter while harboring racist assumptions, capable of both terrible actions and genuine growth. Understanding that complexity, holding space for both his wrongdoing and his capacity for change, that was harder than simple righteous anger. But it was also more true to the messy reality of how people actually are. I don't tell people they have to forgive those who hurt them. I don't tell people they're obligated to educate or help those who discriminate against them. Those are personal choices that everyone has to make based on their own circumstances, their own capacity, their own needs. But I do tell people that they're allowed to choose grace if they want to. That extending second chances doesn't make you weak or naive. That believing in the possibility of change isn't the same as excusing the harm that was done, that you can hold people accountable while also giving them room to grow. And I tell people that their success, their happiness, their peace of mind, those things don't depend on the people who wronged them learning their lessons. Those things come from within, from the choices we make about who we want to be and how we want to move through the world. 2 years after that Tuesday, I'm successful not because Harrison Blake apologized. I'm successful because I worked hard, because I'm talented, because I seized opportunities and created new ones. His apology and his subsequent actions opened doors, yes, but I'm the one who walked through them. Last week, I got an email from the scholarship program at my alma mater. The first Morrison scholar, a young woman named Jasmine from the Bronx, wanted to thank me for the opportunity. She attached a photo of herself on campus, grinning from ear to ear, holding her acceptance letter. I printed that photo and put it on my desk, right next to the photo of my mother that I carry with me everywhere. Two women who represent everything I'm working for, the past that shaped me and the future I'm helping to create. Sometimes I think about that moment on the plane when Blake grabbed my hand during the turbulence. How fear stripped away all pretense and left just two humans trying to survive something terrifying. How in that moment nothing else mattered, not race or class or status, just the fundamental human need for connection and comfort. That's what I try to remember when I'm navigating the complex, messy reality of racism and bias and inequality. That underneath all the systems and structures and prejudices, we're all just humans stumbling through life, trying to figure out how to be better than we were yesterday. Some people, when confronted with their biases, double down and refuse to change. Those people I walk away from. I don't have the time or energy to convince someone to see my humanity when they're determined not to. But some people, when shown their blind spots, genuinely want to do better. Those people I try to work with when I have the capacity and the situation allows for it. Not because they deserve my help, but because the ripple effects of their change can benefit so many others. It's a delicate balance, one I'm still learning to navigate, when to fight, when to teach, when to walk away, when to extend grace. There's no formula, no simple answer. Every situation is different, every person is different, every day brings new challenges. But what I know for certain is this. That terrible Tuesday morning in the airport lounge was simultaneously one of the worst and best things that ever happened to me. Worst because of the humiliation and pain and the reminder that no matter how successful I become, some people will always see my skin color before they see my accomplishments. Best because it led to opportunities I never would have had otherwise, friendships I never would have made, and a deeper understanding of my own strength and resilience. I'm not grateful for racism. I'm not grateful for being profiled and humiliated. But I am grateful for what I chose to do with that experience, how I transformed it from a moment of powerlessness into a catalyst for change. And maybe that's the real lesson here. We can't control what other people do to us. We can't control their biases or their assumptions or their actions, but we can control how we respond. We can choose bitterness or grace, revenge or transformation, isolation or connection. I chose grace and it changed my life, not because grace is always the right choice, but because in that specific moment with that specific person, it was the right choice for me. Your choice might be different, your circumstances might call for different responses, and that's okay. There's no universal right way to respond to injustice. There's only what works for you, what honors your dignity, what serves your well-being. For me that day, what worked was believing that people can change, that grace can coexist with accountability, that something good can come from something terrible. And I was right. People can change, grace and accountability can coexist. Good things can come from terrible experiences. But only if we're willing to do the hard, messy, complicated work of making them happen. Only if we're willing to set boundaries while building bridges, to demand better while believing in the possibility of growth, to protect our peace while still engaging with people who have hurt us. It's exhausting work, it's thankless work sometimes. But it's also powerful work, transformative work, work that ripples out in ways we can't always see or measure. Today, I run a successful company. I mentor young professionals from underrepresented backgrounds. I speak at conferences and serve on advisory boards and use my platform to advocate for equity and justice. I have friendships and opportunities and a life that my younger self could barely have imagined. And it all started with a terrible Tuesday morning in an airport lounge when a man looked at me and decided I didn't belong, and I looked back at him and decided he could learn better. We were both right.